John Kennedy secretly walks in his own store, sees a cashier crying, then hears the one thing no boss should ever hear. The fluorescent lights buzzed softly overhead, casting a sterile glow across the aisles of Family Mart, a modest retail store tucked in a quiet corner of Louisiana. The air smelled faintly of cleaning solution and cardboard, the kind of scent that lingers in places where people come and go without much thought. Behind the hum of activity, customers shuffling with carts, the rhythmic beep of scanners at the registers, and the occasional clang of a stock cart, John Neely Kennedy moved unnoticed. He wasn't the sharply dressed Thuong Nhi Sai or the polished owner of the Family Mart chain that spanned dozens of towns. Today he was just Tom, a temporary worker in a faded navy blue jacket, pushing a bulky floor cleaner down aisle 12. The machine whirred low, its bristles scraping against the linoleum, and Kennedy kept his head down, blending seamlessly into the background. His name tag, slightly crooked, read Tom in plain black letters, and the store manager hadn't batted an eye when he'd shown up that morning. Corporate often sent floaters during busy seasons, and Kennedy's unassuming khakis and scuffed sneakers made him look the part. He wasn't here to make a scene. He was here to listen, to see what his company had become from the ground up, away from the polished reports and boardroom meetings. Kennedy had built Family Mart from a single storefront years ago, a place where he'd once known every employee's name, their kids' birthdays, even their favorite lunch orders. Back then, he'd been the one stacking shelves at dawn, joking with customers over the counter, and sweeping the floors himself after closing. But growth changes things. Now, with stores stretching across the region, Family Mart was a machine of its own, run by systems, policies, and data dashboards he barely recognized. He'd heard whispers, complaints from employees about schedules, about feeling like numbers instead of people. But whispers don't carry far in corner offices. So he'd decided to step into the trenches. No entourage, no announcements. Just him, a fake name, and a chance to see the truth. The floor cleaner hummed as he guided it past the freezer section, the cold air seeping through the glass doors. That's when he heard it, a soft, stifled sob. The kind that's trying so hard to stay hidden, it's almost louder for it. Kennedy slowed the machine, his eyes scanning the aisle. At the end of lane 7, tucked behind the counter where the conveyor belt sat still, a young cashier crouched low. Her head was buried in her hands, her Family Mart apron still tied tightly around her waist, as if she'd just stepped away from her register and couldn't make it any farther. Her headset dangled around her neck, the cord swaying slightly as her shoulders shook. Kennedy edged closer, keeping the cleaner moving to avoid drawing attention. The girl, her name tag read Emma, didn't notice him. She pulled a phone from her pocket, her fingers trembling as she dialed. Her voice, when it came, was barely above a whisper, cracking with the weight of held-back tears. "I'm trying. Okay, I'm trying so hard," she said into the phone, her words spilling out in a rush. "But I can't miss another shift. They'll cut my hours again, and I'm already behind on the electric bill. They sent another eviction notice yesterday. I don't know what to do anymore." There was a pause, the kind that carries the weight of someone else's response on the other end. Kennedy kept his eyes on the floor, but his ears were locked on her voice. "No, I didn't tell them." Emma continued, her tone sharp with frustration. "What's the point? HR keeps saying flexibility is key, but if I'm not available every single hour they want, I'm screwed. You know how this place works. You're either invisible or you're gone." Another pause, longer this time. Her next words hit Kennedy like a punch to the gut. "I lost my sister last year. I'm barely holding on to the apartment. I'm losing myself, and I don't even know why I keep showing up." Her voice broke, and she let out a bitter, quiet laugh. "I just want one person to see me just once, even if it's the guy who made this damn system. But people like him don't come here. Not really. Kennedy's grip tightened on the handle of the floor cleaner. His knuckles whitened, and for a moment, the hum of the machine was the only sound anchoring him. She didn't know who he was, but she was talking about him. Emma's words weren't just a cry for help. They were an indictment of the company he'd built, the policies he'd signed off on in meetings he barely remembered. He'd approved the flexible hours policy years ago, sold to him by consultants as a way to streamline schedules and reward dependable workers. It had sounded fair, logical, like a win for everyone. But now, standing in the aisle, listening to Emma's voice crack under the weight of that same policy, he felt the ground shift beneath him. The system wasn't rewarding her dependability, it was punishing her for being human. He kept moving, guiding the cleaner toward the back of the store, but his mind was racing. Emma's face stayed with him, her tired eyes, the way her hands shook as she clutched her phone, the way her voice carried a kind of resignation that didn't belong in someone so young. She couldn't have been more than 25, maybe younger, but she sounded like someone who'd been carrying the world for years. Kennedy had seen the employee handbook, the performance metrics, the spreadsheets that tracked attendance and productivity. He'd trusted those numbers to tell him how his company was doing. But numbers don't cry. Numbers don't beg to be seen. As he rounded the corner near the dairy section, he glanced back at Emma. She'd stood up, wiping her eyes with the sleeve of her uniform. She adjusted her headset, took a deep breath, and stepped back to her register, her face shifting into a practiced smile as a customer approached. The transformation was jarring, how quickly she buried her pain, how effortlessly she played the part of the cheerful cashier. Kennedy had seen that kind of mask before in his early days, working the floor, but he'd forgotten what it felt like to wear it. He pushed the cleaner past a display of canned goods, his thoughts spiraling. How many others were like Emma? How many were smiling through their own silent crises, invisible to the system he'd built? The store was busy now, the midday rush bringing in a steady stream of customers. Mothers with toddlers in tow, elderly couples comparing prices on cereal, a delivery driver hauling boxes through the back entrance. Kennedy kept working, sweeping the cleaner in slow, deliberate arcs. But his eyes darted to the other employees. There was a stalker in aisle 3, a young guy with earbuds moving with the kind of detached efficiency that comes from long hours and low pay. At the customer service desk, an older woman with graying hair handled a return with a calm, professional tone, but her hands moved a little too quickly, like she was racing against some unseen clock. Kennedy wondered what their stories were, what they weren't saying out loud. He thought back to the early days of Family Mart, when it was just him and a handful of employees in a single store. He'd known them all: Maria, who brought homemade tamales to share on Fridays; Carl, who'd worked the night shift to pay for his daughter's college; Jenny, who'd stayed late to help him fix a broken register. They'd been a team, a family of sorts. But as Family Mart grew, so did the distance between him and the people who kept it running. Consultants took over HR policies, came in binders thicker than his arm, and efficiency became the gospel. He'd trusted the experts, signed the papers, and moved on to the next meeting. Now Emma's words echoed in his head. People like him don't come here. She was right. He hadn't come here, not really, not until today. By late afternoon, the store had quieted down, the lunch crowd thinning out. Kennedy parked the floor cleaner near the stock room and took a moment to lean against a wall, his back aching from the unfamiliar work. He wasn't used to this anymore. The long hours on his feet, the repetitive motion of pushing the machine. But the discomfort felt grounding, a reminder of what his employees did every day. He glanced at Emma's register again. She was ringing up a customer's groceries, her movements quick and precise, her smile unwavering. But he noticed the way her eyes flicked to the clock above the exit, the way her shoulders tensed when the store manager walked by. She was holding it together, but barely. Kennedy knew he couldn't fix everything in a day. He couldn't undo years of policies with a single conversation. But he also knew he couldn't walk away from what he'd heard. Emma's voice, her raw, desperate plea to be seen, had cracked something open in him. He wasn't just Tom the temp worker anymore. He was John Neely Kennedy, the man who'd built this company, and he'd built the system that was breaking her. The question was what he was going to do about it. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows through the store's front windows, Kennedy made a decision. He'd stay, not just for the rest of his shift, but for as long as it took to understand the full scope of what was happening here. He'd watch, listen, and learn. He'd talk to the stockers, the cashiers, the cleaners, anyone who'd give him a glimpse into their world. And he'd start with Emma. Not today, not yet. She didn't need a stranger prying into her pain, but he'd keep his eyes on her, her file, her story. He'd find out how someone with her work ethic, her resilience, had been pushed to the edge by a system he'd let grow unchecked. The floor cleaner sat idle now, its hum replaced by the soft chatter of customers and the clink of coins at the registers. Kennedy adjusted his name tag, straightened his jacket, and moved toward the back of the store. He had work to do, not just cleaning floors, but cleaning up the mess he'd allowed to take root. Emma's words rang in his ears as he walked. "I just want one person to see me." He saw her now, and he wasn't going to look away. The morning sun filtered through the smudged glass doors of Family Mart, casting a pale glow across the linoleum floors. John Neely Kennedy still cloaked in his disguise as Tom the temp worker pushed a cart of cleaning supplies down aisle 9. The store was quieter now, the early hours filled with the soft shuffle of stockers refilling shelves and the occasional chime of the front door as early customers trickled in. Kennedy's navy jacket hung loosely on his frame, the name tag reading Tom pinned slightly askew. He'd been at the store for 2 days now, blending into the rhythm of the place, sweeping, wiping down counters, restocking paper towels in the restroom. But his eyes were always moving, watching the employees, the customers, the small details that reports never captured. Emma, the young cashier whose tearful phone call had shaken him, was at her register again, her movements quick and precise, her smile a practiced mask. Kennedy couldn't shake her words from the night before. "I just want one person to see me." They clung to him, a quiet accusation that followed him through every aisle. He'd come back today with a purpose, not just to observe, but to dig deeper. The floor cleaner was parked in the stockroom for now. Kennedy had volunteered for odd jobs around the store, anything to keep him close to the pulse of the place. He started near the back, organizing a stack of cardboard boxes that had been left in disarray. As he worked, he kept an ear on the conversations around him. A stalker named Luis, barely out of his teens, grumbled to a coworker about the new schedule posted in the break room. "They cut me to 12 hours next week," he said, tossing a box of cereal onto the shelf with a little too much force. "I told them I can't do mornings because of school, and now I'm barely on the roster." The other worker, a middle-aged woman named Carla, nodded, but didn't look up from her pricing gun. "That's the flex schedule for you," she muttered. "You say no once, and the system spits you out." Kennedy's jaw tightened. The flexible hours policy again. He'd signed off on it years ago, back when Family Mart was expanding, and consultants promised it would optimize staffing. The pitch had been simple: reward availability, reduce absences, keep the stores running smoothly. It sounded like a win for everyone. Managers got predictable schedules. Employees got stability if they could work open hours. But what he was hearing now told a different story. The system didn't reward hard work. It punished anyone who couldn't bend to its demands. A sick kid, a second job, a family crisis, any crack in availability, and the algorithm flagged you. Fewer hours less, pay no mercy. Kennedy stacked another box, his hands moving slower as he processed the weight of it. He'd built Family Mart to be a place where people could thrive, not just survive. How had it come to this? By mid-morning, Kennedy had moved to the front of the store, wiping down the checkout counters near Emma's lane. She was ringing up a customer's groceries, a harried mother with a toddler tugging at her sleeve. Emma's voice was warm, professional, as she chatted about the weather and bagged the items with care. But Kennedy noticed the way her eyes flicked to the clock above the exit, the way her fingers lingered on the scanner for a moment too long, like she was bracing herself for the next task. He'd seen her file last night, pulling it up on his laptop in the dim light of his hotel room. Emma Thompson, cashier, Level 1 store, 47, Louisiana. Her performance reviews were spotless. Perfect attendance, glowing customer feedback. No disciplinary issues. But 6 weeks ago, her hours had started to slide. From 30 a week to 22, then 15, now down to 10. The drop coincided with 2 days she'd taken off, marked as personal leave in the system. No details, no follow-up. Just a flag for low availability, and the algorithm had done the rest. Kennedy's stomach churned as he recalled the rest of her file. Those 2 days off had been for a family emergency she'd mentioned losing her sister on the phone. The system didn't care about that. It didn't ask why. It just saw gaps in her schedule and cut her hours week by week until she was barely scraping by. He thought about the eviction notice she'd mentioned, the electric bill she couldn't pay. He'd seen a glimpse of it himself during her break yesterday when she'd left her phone face up on the break room table. He'd been taking out the trash, a task he'd volunteered for to stay close to the staff, and caught the screen's glow as he passed. A text notification, rent due. Final warning, 3 days late. The words had burned into his mind, a stark reminder of the human cost behind the numbers he'd once trusted. He moved to the next counter, spraying cleaner and wiping in slow circles, his thoughts racing. Emma wasn't the only one. He'd overheard similar stories from other employees. Carla, the woman with the pricing gun, had mentioned skipping doctor's appointments because she couldn't risk missing a shift. Luis, the stalker, was juggling community college and a second job, but the schedule cuts were forcing him to consider dropping out. The system was squeezing them all, and Kennedy had let it happen. He'd signed the papers, nodded along in meetings, trusted the consultants who'd promised efficiency. But efficiency wasn't fairness. It wasn't humanity. By noon, the store was picking up the lunch crowd, bringing a steady hum of activity. Kennedy took a moment to restock the plastic bags at Emma's register, giving him a chance to observe her up close. She was meticulous, scanning items with a rhythm that spoke of years on the job. Her uniform was clean, but faded, the green apron slightly frayed at the edges, like it had been washed too many times by hand. She greeted each customer with the same calm tone, but between transactions, her face would soften, her eyes drifting to the exit door. Kennedy wondered what she was looking for. Maybe a moment of escape. Maybe someone to walk through and change things. He wanted to talk to her, to ask about her story, but he held back. As Tom, he was just a temp, a nobody. He couldn't risk breaking his cover yet, not until he understood the full scope of what was happening. During a lull, Kennedy slipped into the break room to grab a bottle of water. The space was cramped with a wobbly table, a microwave that smelled of burnt popcorn, and a bulletin board plastered with schedules and company memos. Emma was there, sitting alone, eating a sandwich wrapped in foil. Her phone buzzed once, and she glanced at it, her expression tightening. She read the message, then set the phone face down, her fingers lingering on it, like she was afraid to let go. Kennedy busied himself with refilling the coffee machine, but his eyes caught the faint glow of her screen. Another reminder, this one from her landlord. He couldn't make out the details, but the word urgent stood out in bold. He turned away, his chest tight. This wasn't just about Emma's hours or her paycheck. This was about her life unraveling, and the system he'd built was pulling the threads. As the day wore on, Kennedy moved to other tasks, restocking shelves, sweeping the parking lot, helping a delivery driver unload crates. Everywhere he went, he heard echoes of the same story. A cashier named Sarah whispered to a coworker about skipping her kid's school event to avoid losing shifts. A janitor named Mike, older and limping slightly, admitted he was working through a bad knee because he couldn't afford to take time off. The flexible hours policy wasn't just a rule. It was a chokehold, strangling anyone who couldn't keep up with its demands. Kennedy felt a growing anger not at the employees, but at himself. He'd let this happen. He'd trusted the system to be fair to protect the people who kept Family Mart running. Instead, it was punishing them for living. By late afternoon, Kennedy was back near the registers, helping bag groceries at a nearby lane. Emma was still at her post, her smile unwavering, even as the line grew long. A customer, an older man with a cart full of canned goods, complimented her speed, and she thanked him with a warmth that felt genuine. But Kennedy saw the strain behind it, the way her hands shook slightly as she handed over the receipt. He wanted to say something to tell her she wasn't invisible, that someone was listening, but he didn't. Not yet. Instead, he made a mental note to dig deeper into the scheduling system, to pull every report he could find, to talk to more employees. He needed to know how far this went, how many others were struggling in silence. As the store closed for the night, Kennedy lingered in the parking lot, watching the employees trickle out. Emma was one of the last, her backpack slung over one shoulder, her head down as she walked to a beat-up sedan. She didn't look back at the store, didn't pause to chat with anyone. She just got in her car and drove off, her taillights fading into the dusk. Kennedy stood there, the weight of her words settling over him like a fog. "I'm losing myself," she'd said. He couldn't let that happen. Not to her, not to anyone. He wasn't sure how yet, but he was going to fix this. Not as Tom the temp worker, but as John Neely Kennedy, the man who'd built Family Mart and had the power to change it. He just needed to figure out where to start. The air in Family Mart felt heavier today, the fluorescent lights casting their usual sterile glow over the aisles, but something was different for John Neely Kennedy. He moved through the store as Tom the temp worker, his faded jacket and scuffed sneakers blending him into the background. The name tag pinned to his chest still read Tom, but his mind was far from the role he played. Emma's words from 2 days ago echoed relentlessly in his head. "I just want one person to see me." He'd spent the last 48 hours watching, listening, and piecing together the stories of the employees around him. The stockers, the cashiers, the delivery drivers, all of them carried the same quiet strain. The same fear of slipping through the cracks of a system that didn't care. Kennedy had built Family Mart to be a place of opportunity, but what he'd seen was a machine that ground down the very people it depended on. Today, he wasn't just here to observe. He was here to act. Kennedy started the morning in the stockroom, helping unload a delivery of canned goods. The work was repetitive, but it gave him a chance to talk to the other employees. He struck up a conversation with Mike, the janitor. he'd noticed limping the day before. Mike was in his late 50s with a weathered face and a quiet demeanor. As they stacked boxes, Mike mentioned his bad knee, how he'd been putting off surgery because taking time off meant risking his hours. "You miss a shift, and the system dings you," Mike said, wiping sweat from his brow. "Next thing you know, you're down to 1 day a week. I can't afford that. Not with my wife's meds." Kennedy nodded, keeping his expression neutral, but inside his frustration grew. Mike wasn't lazy or unreliable. He was a man trying to keep his family afloat, and the flexible hours policy Kennedy had once approved was punishing him for it. By mid-morning, Kennedy had moved to the front of the store, sweeping near the registers. Emma was at her usual post lane 7, ringing up a steady stream of customers. Her green apron was neatly tied, her headset in place. But Kennedy noticed the small signs of exhaustion, the way her shoulders slumped slightly between transactions, the way her smile flickered when no one was looking. He'd seen her file read the numbers perfect performance, near perfect attendance, until those 2 days she'd taken off for her sister's passing. The system had flagged her as low availability, and her hours had been slashed without a single manager asking why. It wasn't just Emma. The more Kennedy talked to the staff, the more he heard the same story. Sarah, a cashier with 2 kids, had stopped volunteering at her son's school because she couldn't risk missing a shift. Luis, the young stalker, was on the verge of dropping out of college because his hours were too unpredictable to balance with classes. The policy was supposed to make things fair, but it was breaking people instead. Kennedy decided it was time to get closer. He volunteered to bag groceries at the register next to Emma's, giving him a chance to observe her up close. A customer, an elderly woman with a cart full of frozen meals, complimented Emma's patience as she scanned each item carefully. "You're always so kind," the woman said, her voice warm. Emma smiled, a genuine one this time, and thanked her. But as the woman walked away, Kennedy saw Emma's face fall, her eyes drifting to the exit door again. He wondered what she was thinking, maybe about the eviction notice, the bills piling up, or the sister she'd lost. He wanted to say something to let her know someone was listening, but he held back. As Tom, he was just a co-worker, not someone with the power to change her world. Not yet. During a lull in the afternoon, Kennedy found a moment to approach her. He kept it casual, leaning against the counter as he restocked bags. "Hey, Emma," he said, his voice light. "You were really great with that lady earlier. You always that patient." Emma glanced at him, her expression guarded, but not unkind. "Comes with the job," she said, her tone neutral. She adjusted her headset, her fingers fidgeting with the cord. Kennedy pressed gently, testing the waters. "You ever think about doing something else, somewhere that's not so intense?" The question hung in the air, and for a moment he thought she might brush it off. But Emma looked at him, her eyes tired but honest. "I used to," she said quietly, "but right now it's not about what I want, it's about survival." She paused, then added, "I don't need a dream job. I just need a job that doesn't make me feel like disappearing." Her words hit Kennedy like a freight train. He nodded, keeping his face steady, but inside he was reeling. Disappearing. That's what his system was doing to her, erasing her bit by bit, with every cut to her hours, every automated flag in the scheduling software. He thanked her for the chat and moved back to his tasks, but her words stayed with him, a weight he couldn't shake. He spent the rest of the afternoon helping in the stockroom, carrying boxes, sweeping corners, but his mind was elsewhere. He thought about the board meetings where he'd signed off on the policies, the consultants who'd sold him on efficiency, the spreadsheets that promised stability. He'd trusted them, but they'd failed Emma. They'd failed Mike, Sarah, Luis, and who knew how many others. By late afternoon, Kennedy knew he couldn't stay silent any longer. He'd seen enough, heard enough. The system he'd built was broken, and he was the only one who could fix it. He slipped into the manager's office during a break, pretending to drop off cleaning supplies, and asked the store manager, a wiry man named Greg, for a quick word. Greg, distracted by a stack of paperwork, barely looked up. "What's up, Tom?" he asked, his tone clipped. Kennedy hesitated, then said, "Just wondering how the schedules get made. Seems like some folks are getting hit hard with cuts." Greg shrugged, not meeting his eyes. "It's all automated. Corporate sets the rules. If someone's not available, the system adjusts. Keeps things fair." Kennedy nodded, but his blood was boiling. Fair. That word had lost all meaning here. That evening, as the store was winding down, Kennedy made a decision. He couldn't keep playing Tom. He needed to step up as John Neely Kennedy, the man who'd built Family Mart, and take responsibility for the mess he'd allowed. He called Greg and the district manager, Linda, into a meeting after closing. He didn't tell them who he was, not yet. He asked them to gather the staff near aisle 3, saying corporate had sent him to make an announcement. The employees shuffled in, tired from their shifts, their faces a mix of curiosity and wariness. Emma stood near the back, her arms crossed, her expression unreadable. Kennedy took a deep breath, his heart pounding. This was it. He stepped forward, shedding the navy jacket and letting it fall to the floor. The name tag came off next, revealing the charcoal suit he'd worn underneath. The room went silent. "My name is John Neely Kennedy," he said, his voice steady but warm. "I'm the owner of Family Mart." Gasps rippled through the group. Greg's jaw dropped, and Linda's eyes widened. Emma's lips parted, but she didn't move. Kennedy held up a folder, Emma's employee file. "I've been here for 3 days, working as Tom, watching how this store runs. And I've seen things I can't ignore. This is Emma Thompson's file. Perfect attendance, perfect customer reviews, no issues. But when she took 2 days off for a family loss, our system cut her hours. No one asked why. No one checked. And now she's fighting to keep her home." He turned to Emma, his voice softening. "I heard you the other night, Emma. You said you wanted someone to see you. I'm sorry it took me this long." Her eyes widened, a flicker of shock crossing her face. She whispered, "I didn't know anyone was listening." Kennedy nodded. "I know. That's the problem." No one was. He faced the group again. "This isn't just about Emma. It's about all of you. The system we built is failing you. It's punishing you for having lives, for being human. That ends today." He announced the immediate suspension of the flexible hours policy, promising that managers would review schedules with human judgment, not algorithms. "If you're struggling, we'll see you. We'll help you," he said. "That's not just a promise. It's what this company should have been all along." The room was quiet, the weight of his words settling over everyone. Emma's chin trembled, but she stood tall, her eyes locked on Kennedy. He handed her a small laminated sign he'd had made that morning. It read, "This is a human workplace. You will not be punished for being human. Put this where everyone can see it," he told her. She took it, her hands steady now, and nodded. The other employees began to murmur, some with cautious hope, others with disbelief. Kennedy knew this was just the beginning. He'd stirred something up, and there was no going back. As the meeting ended, Kennedy stayed behind, talking to the staff, listening to their stories. Emma lingered, the sign still in her hands. She didn't say much, but her eyes told him she felt seen for the first time in a long time. Kennedy knew he had work to do, not just in this store, but across every Family Mart. He'd start here with Emma, with Mike, with Sarah and Luis. He'd rebuild what he'd let break one person at a time. The Louisiana Family Mart glowed softly under its fluorescent lights, but the atmosphere had shifted in the 3 months since John Neely Kennedy stood in aisle 3, shedding his disguise as Tom to reveal himself as the company's owner. The shelves were still stocked with the same cereals and canned goods. The registers still beeped with each scan, but the store felt alive in a way it hadn't before. Employees moved with a quiet ease, their conversations peppered with laughter instead of hushed complaints. Customers noticed it too, lingering to chat with cashiers or leaving 5-star reviews about the welcoming service. Kennedy, no longer hiding behind a faded jacket and a fake name tag, made regular visits not as a distant executive, but as a man determined to stay connected to the people who kept Family Mart running. He'd traded his charcoal suit for a simple flannel shirt, sleeves rolled up ready to stack boxes or pour coffee in the break room while listening to his employees' stories. Emma Thompson, the cashier, whose tearful phone call had sparked Kennedy's awakening, stood at lane 7, her green apron crisp and new, a far cry from the frayed one she'd worn when Kennedy first saw her. Her headset rested lightly around her neck, and her smile came easier now, no longer a mask to hide her exhaustion. She'd been restored to a full 32-hour work week, enough to cover her rent and keep the eviction notices at bay. But more than that, Emma had found a new role leading Voices First, a council of frontline workers tasked with reviewing HR policies before they were implemented. Every Monday, she gathered with coworkers in the cramped break room, their voices shaping the future of Family Mart. Above the bulletin board, a laminated sign read, "This is a human workplace. You will not be punished for being human." It was the sign Kennedy had given her, now displayed in every Family Mart across the region, a quiet promise that things had changed. The impact rippled beyond the store's walls. Turnover plummeted, with fewer employees quitting under the weight of impossible schedules. Sales ticked upward, not dramatically, but enough to show that customers felt the difference, a warmth, a genuineness that hadn't been there before. Kennedy saw it in the small moments. Sarah, the cashier with 2 kids, now able to attend her daughter's soccer games because her manager adjusted her shifts. Mike, the janitor, back from knee surgery with his hours secure. Luis, the young stalker, balancing college and work without the constant threat of cut hours. These weren't just numbers on a spreadsheet. They were lives, reclaimed people who no longer felt invisible. Emma had grown into her role with a quiet strength. She wasn't loud or flashy, but her presence commanded respect. During Voices First meetings, she listened intently, jotting down notes as co-workers shared their concerns. When a proposed policy risked repeating past mistakes like prioritizing availability over fairness, she spoke up, her voice steady but firm. "We can't let the system decide who's valuable," she'd said at one meeting, her words echoing the pain she'd once felt. Her co-workers nodded, trusting her because she'd been where they were fighting to be seen. She'd become a bridge between the staff and management, ensuring no one else would slip through the cracks like she had. Kennedy, too, had transformed. He no longer saw himself as the untouchable owner signing off on policies from a corner office. He spent hours in the stores, not just this one, but others across Louisiana, talking to cashiers, helping unload deliveries, asking about employees' lives. One afternoon, he sat with Carla, the cashier, who'd once wielded a pricing gun with weary precision. Over coffee, she told him about her daughter's acceptance to nursing school, her eyes bright with pride. Kennedy listened, asking questions, remembering the days when he knew every employee's story by heart. Another day, he helped Mike restock cleaning supplies, learning about his wife's recovery and their plans to visit their grandkids. These conversations weren't just gestures. They were Kennedy's way of rebuilding what he'd let slip away, a company that valued its people as much as its profits. The lesson of Family Mart's transformation was clear, and it stretched far beyond the store. Leadership, Kennedy realized, wasn't about crafting perfect systems or chasing efficiency at all costs. It was about seeing the people behind the numbers, understanding their struggles, and taking responsibility when those systems failed them. Emma's story had been the wake-up call a young woman pushed to the edge by a policy he'd approved her plea to be seen cutting through years of detachment. But it wasn't just Emma. It was Mike, Sarah, Luis, Carla, and countless others who'd been silenced by a system that didn't care. Kennedy had learned that true leadership meant showing up, listening, and acting, even when it meant admitting you were wrong. For the employees, the change was tangible. The Voices First Council gave them a say, a way to shape their workplace without fear of retaliation. Managers retrained to prioritize people over algorithms now met with staff to discuss schedules, ensuring flexibility worked both ways. The sign on the wall wasn't just words, it was a commitment, a reminder that Family Mart was a place where you could be human, where you could struggle and still be valued. For Emma, it was personal. Leading voices. First had given her purpose a reason to show up beyond just paying the bills. She felt seen not just by Kennedy, but by her co-workers, her customers, herself. She no longer looked at the exit door with longing. She looked at her lane with pride. The broader lesson was one for everyone, not just those in Family Mart. It was for anyone who's ever felt invisible at work, who's held back tears to keep their job, who's wondered if their struggles mattered. It was a call to leaders to look closer, to listen harder, to act with courage. Kennedy's journey showed that change doesn't require grand gestures. It starts with one person seeing another, truly seeing them, and refusing to let them fade away. It's a reminder that businesses aren't just buildings or balance sheets. They are made of people, each with their own stories, their own strength. One evening, as the store neared closing, Kennedy stopped by Emma's register. She was finishing with a customer, her smile warm as she handed over a receipt. When the customer left, she glanced at Kennedy, offering a small nod. "Thanks for sticking around," she said, her voice soft but steady. Kennedy smiled back. "Thanks for speaking up," he replied. He headed to the break room where the Voices First team was preparing for their next meeting. The sign above the bulletin board caught his eye, its words a quiet anchor. Family Mart wasn't perfect. It never would be. But it was trying to be human, and that was enough to start. For Emma, for Kennedy, for everyone who walked through those doors, it was a beginning worth building on.